The Galactic Cartographers Guild had been mapping space for over 1,000 years. Their massive archive ships held detailed charts of every star system, trade route, and territorial boundary in the known galaxy. 400 different alien species trusted their maps to navigate the vast emptiness between worlds. Every merchant, explorer, and military commander relied on their precision. But there was one section that always made new cartographers ask questions. On every official galactic map, in the outer reaches of what some called the Orion Arm, sat a blank space marked only as Restricted Zone 7 Alpha in small, unremarkable text. No stars were marked there. No trade routes passed through it. Number. Territorial claims overlapped its boundaries. Ambassador Keth of the Alterian Coalition had always been curious about restricted zones. In his 40 years as a diplomat, he had visited the most dangerous regions of the galaxy. He had negotiated peace treaties with the savage blood-claw tribes who decorated their ships with the bones of their enemies. He had dined with the peaceful, crystalline beings who communicated through harmonic vibrations that could shatter glass if not properly modulated. He had even survived a formal dinner with the Hive Collective, whose idea of hospitality involved temporarily implanting guests with worker drones. Nothing in the galaxy frightened him anymore. Or so he believed. His current mission was routine. Diplomatic work on the Outer Rim. The mining consortium had discovered a new asteroid belt rich in rare metals, and several species were making competing claims. Keth's job was to mediate the dispute and establish fair mining rights before the situation escalated into armed conflict. It was the kind of work he could do in his sleep. The trouble began when his transport ship, the diplomatic vessel Harmony, suffered a catastrophic engine failure 3 days out from the mining station. The ship's chief engineer, a competent Vorthan named Grix, explained that the quantum drive had developed a critical resonance cascade that would take at least 6 hours to repair. They would need to drift in normal space while the engineering team worked. Keth accepted the delay with his usual patience. He used the time to review his diplomatic files and prepare his negotiation strategy. But as the hours passed, boredom set in. He decided to visit the ship's observation deck to study the star patterns of this unfamiliar region. That was when he noticed something odd about their position. According to the navigation display, they were drifting very close to the edge of Restricted Zone 7 Alpha. The boundary was less than 2 light hours away, practically next door by galactic standards. Curiosity got the better of him. Keth made his way to the ship's sensor control room and convinced the duty officer to let him access the long-range scanning array. After all, he was an ambassador. His diplomatic credentials gave him access to most ship systems, and the young officer was too nervous to refuse. What Keth discovered made his 3 hearts nearly stop beating. The restricted zone was not empty. His sensors detected massive artificial structures scattered throughout the region. Space stations the size of small moons orbited unnamed stars. Vast shipyards stretched across entire star systems. Most shocking of all, several planets showed clear signs of advanced civilization with energy output readings that exceeded anything in the galactic database. The sensor data indicated a technological infrastructure that rivaled the greatest galactic powers. Energy signatures suggested industrial capacity that could supply half the galaxy. Ship movements showed organized traffic patterns more complex than the busiest trade hubs. This was not an empty zone. This was a hidden empire. Keth's hands shook as he copied the sensor data to his personal files. He needed to understand what he was looking at. Using his diplomatic access codes, he connected to the Galactic Archives and began searching for any historical information about Restricted Zone 7-Alpha. Most files came back with standard security blocks. The information was classified above his clearance level, which was unusual since ambassadors typically had access to most galactic records. But persistence paid off. In the deep archives, buried under layers of bureaucratic filing systems, he found fragments, a reference to something called the human quarantine, dated over 300 years ago. A mention of Terran containment protocol in a military engineering manual. A single line in an old treaty document that read, "System Sol and surrounding territories remain off-limits to all galactic civilizations by unanimous council vote." The most disturbing find was a fragment from what appeared to be a Galactic Council emergency session transcript. The date was 2157 Standard Galactic Time, over 3 centuries ago. Most of the text was corrupted or redacted, but one section remained clear. By unanimous vote of all member species, no contact shall be made with the inhabitants of the designated containment zone under penalty of immediate species-wide excommunication from all galactic institutions and trade networks. 847 different species had signed that agreement. Every major civilization in the galaxy had voted to pretend that whatever lived in that zone simply did not exist. Keth stared at the data for a long time. The implications were staggering. Somewhere in that blank space on the galactic maps lived a species called humans. They had been deliberately hidden from galactic society for 3 centuries. The very fact that such a massive conspiracy existed suggested that these humans were either incredibly dangerous or incredibly valuable. Given the extreme measures taken to contain them, Keth suspected it was the former. He was so absorbed in his research that he almost missed the proximity alarm. The ship's navigation system was warning that they were drifting closer to the restricted zone boundary. In another hour, they would cross into forbidden space. Keth quickly closed his files and returned to his cabin. He said nothing to the crew about what he had discovered. But as the Harmony's engines came back online and they resumed course to their destination, he could not stop thinking about the hidden civilization lurking just beyond the edge of known space. 3 days later, when he arrived at the mining station and began his mediation work, Keth found it almost impossible to concentrate. The dispute over mining rights seemed trivial compared to the secret he now carried. Somewhere out there, an entire species lived in forced isolation, hidden from the galaxy by a conspiracy of silence that involved every known civilization. The question that haunted him was simple. What had the humans done to make the entire galaxy agree they should never be contacted again? And more importantly, what were they doing now, after 3 centuries of isolation in the dark spaces between the stars? Ambassador Keth had always prided himself on his diplomatic curiosity. But for the first time in his career, he wondered if some secrets were too dangerous to uncover. Director Walsh had been staring at the same set of sensor readings for 23 years. Her monitoring station, officially designated as Galactic Observation Post Omega 7, sat in empty space exactly 1 light-year from the boundary of what the galaxy called Restricted Zone 7 Alpha. Her job was simple and boring. Watch the boundary, report any attempted incursions. File daily status reports confirming that nothing had changed. In all her years of service, she had filed exactly 0 incident reports. The restricted zone remained quiet. No ships came out. No ships went in. The boundary held steady, marked by a series of automated warning beacons that had been functioning without maintenance for over 2 centuries. Walsh often wondered what her life might have been like if she had chosen a different career path. She could have been a merchant captain, traveling between the stars and seeing new worlds. She could have joined the exploration corps and helped map unknown regions of the galaxy. Instead, she had accepted this posting because it offered stability, good pay, and minimal stress. Her staff consisted of 8 technicians from various species, all of whom had been selected for their ability to keep secrets and follow orders without asking questions. The Galactic Council paid them well for their discretion. They knew that their job was important, even if they did not fully understand why today started like any other day. Walsh arrived at her command station at the beginning of her shift and reviewed the overnight sensor logs. Everything was normal. The automated systems had detected no unusual activity. The boundary remained intact. She began drafting her routine daily report when Technician Brex, a young Corvani with excellent sensor skills, called out from his station. "Director, we have an unscheduled vessel approaching the perimeter." Walsh immediately shifted her attention to the main display. A mid-sized transport ship was drifting toward the boundary, but its movement pattern was wrong. Instead of the steady course of a normal vessel, it was tumbling slowly and moving at an irregular speed. The ship was clearly in distress. Identification? Walsh asked. Diplomatic vessel Harmony, registered to the Altarian Coalition, Ambassador Keth commanding. They appear to have suffered engine failure. Walsh felt her stomach tighten. A diplomatic vessel meant high-profile passengers and potential political complications. If something happened to an ambassador near the restricted zone, there would be questions. Lots of questions. Current distance from the boundary? 1.7 light hours in closing. At their current drift rate, they will cross the perimeter in approximately 4 hours. Walsh quickly reviewed the standard protocols. Any vessel approaching within 1 light hour of the boundary was to receive an automated warning to change course. If they continued to approach, she was authorized to dispatch a deterrent force to escort them away. If they actually crossed into the restricted zone, she was required to implement Protocol 7. Walsh had never wanted to know the details of Protocol 7, but her security clearance required her to be briefed on all emergency procedures. The memory of that briefing still gave her nightmares. Protocol 7 called for the complete elimination of any witnesses to activity within the restricted zone. No exceptions. No survivors. No evidence left behind. The idea of murdering innocent civilians because of an accidental boundary crossing horrified her, but she understood the reasoning. The secret of the restricted zone was considered so important that the Galactic Council was willing to commit genocide to protect it. The fact that such extreme measures were authorized told her everything she needed to know about what lay beyond that boundary. "Director," Brex called out again. "The diplomatic vessel has activated its long-range sensors. They are actively scanning beyond the perimeter." This was much worse than a simple boundary violation. If Ambassador Keth was scanning the restricted zone, he might discover what the galaxy had spent 3 centuries trying to hide. Walsh's orders were clear, but she hesitated. The ambassador was a respected diplomat with friends throughout the galactic government. His disappearance would trigger investigations that might expose the very secret they were trying to protect. Walsh made a decision that violated every protocol in her manual. Instead of following standard procedure, she activated the emergency communication array and sent an encrypted message directly to the Galactic Council headquarters. The message was brief. Perimeter breach imminent. Civilian diplomatic vessel has visual confirmation of restricted zone activity. Ambassador Keth aboard. Requesting immediate guidance before implementing standard protocols. The response came back faster than she had ever seen from the notoriously slow galactic bureaucracy. The message was marked with security classifications she had never seen before. The text was even more disturbing. Maintain maximum distance. Monitor only, under no circumstances allow direct contact. If boundary breach occurs, implement Protocol 7 immediately. No exceptions. Walsh stared at the message for a long time. The Council was prepared to authorize the murder of one of their own ambassadors to protect this secret. Whatever lived in the restricted zone was more important than diplomatic immunity, more important than galactic law, more important than the life of an innocent being who had simply suffered engine failure at the wrong time. But Walsh had not survived 23 years in this job by following orders blindly. She had learned to think for herself, to consider the larger consequences of her actions. If she followed orders and implemented Protocol 7, Ambassador Keth would die, but his disappearance would raise questions. The Altarian Coalition would demand answers. Other species would start asking why diplomatic vessels were vanishing near restricted zones. The secret would not remain secret much longer if they kept killing people to protect it. Walsh made another decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She composed a second message, this one sent on an untraceable channel using codes that officially did not exist. The message was directed to the Harmony's communication system. Unknown vessel, you are approaching restricted space. Repair your engines immediately and depart this region. Do not investigate further. Do not report what you have seen. Ask no questions. Trust no one with this information. Your survival depends on your discretion. She sent the message and then deleted all records of its transmission. If the Council ever discovered what she had done, she would face the same fate as anyone else who threatened the secret of the restricted zone. But she could not bring herself to murder an innocent diplomat for the crime of curiosity. Over the next several hours, Walsh watched as the Harmony's engineering team worked frantically to repair their engines. She monitored their sensor activity and noted with relief that the ambassador had stopped his active scanning of the restricted zone. Whether he had heeded her warning or simply completed his investigation, she could not tell. When the Harmony's engines finally came back online and the ship changed course away from the boundary, Walsh felt a mixture of relief and dread. She had successfully prevented a crisis, but she had also revealed to Ambassador Keth that someone was watching the restricted zone. Someone who was willing to help him. Despite official orders to the contrary, Walsh completed her daily report with the standard language about routine patrol operations and no unusual activity. She did not mention the diplomatic vessel or her unauthorized communications. But as she prepared to end her shift, she could not shake the feeling that she had just set in motion events that would change everything. The secret of the restricted zone had been protected for 3 centuries through isolation and intimidation. But secrets had a way of getting out, especially when curious diplomats started asking the right questions. Walsh suspected that Ambassador Keth would not simply forget what he had seen and return to his normal duties. The galaxy's greatest secret was about to become much harder to keep. Ambassador Keth could not sleep. 3 weeks had passed since his encounter near Restricted Zone 7 Alpha, and the mysterious warning message continued to echo in his mind. Someone had been watching him. Someone who knew he was investigating the Forbidden region. Someone who had chosen to help him instead of following official protocols. The mining dispute he had been sent to mediate was resolved quickly and successfully. Both parties accepted his proposed compromise, signed the treaty, and departed with expressions of gratitude for his diplomatic skill. But Keth felt no satisfaction from his success. His mind was consumed by questions about the hidden civilization he had discovered. Upon returning to the coalition capital world of New Altair, Keth threw himself into research with an intensity that surprised his colleagues. He spent long hours in the government archives, using his diplomatic access to search through centuries of records. Most of his searches yielded nothing. References to Restricted Zone 7 Alpha were either classified beyond his clearance level or simply missing from the files. But Keth had learned patience during his decades as a diplomat. He approached the problem systematically, looking for indirect references and cross-connections. He studied old trade records, military deployment logs, and historical treaty documents. Slowly, a pattern began to emerge. 327 years ago, several major galactic powers had simultaneously restructured their military forces. Trade routes had been mysteriously rerouted around an entire sector of space. The Galactic Cartographers Guild had stopped updating maps for a specific region without explanation. Most intriguingly, the Galactic Council had held an emergency session that lasted for 6 months, the longest in recorded history. The official records of that council session were classified at the highest levels, but Keth's diplomatic status gave him access to some supporting documents. Supply requisitions showed that representatives from 847 different species had attended. Accommodation records indicated that many delegations had remained on the council station for the entire 6-month period, suggesting negotiations of unprecedented complexity. The breakthrough came when Keth discovered a misfiled document in the archives of the Diplomatic Historical Society. It was a partial transcript of testimony given to the emergency council session, apparently saved by a clerk who had confused it with routine documentation. The witness was identified only as Fleet Admiral Zex of the 3rd Zephyrian Battle Group. The transcript was fragmentary, but what remained was shocking. Admiral Zex described a military campaign against what he called the Terran Resistance. That had begun as a routine territorial expansion, but had escalated into something unprecedented. According to his testimony, the Zephyrian Empire had attempted to claim several star systems in the Orion Arm that contained valuable resources and appeared to be inhabited by a technologically primitive species. Initial contact proceeded normally, the transcript read. The locals identified themselves as humans from a planet called Earth. Their technology appeared to be several centuries behind Galactic standard. We offered them the usual terms for integration into the Empire. They refused and demanded that we leave their space immediately. The transcript continued with Admiral Zex describing the Empire's decision to take the systems by force. The Zephyrians had expected quick victory against a primitive species with inferior technology. Instead, they found themselves fighting an enemy that seemed to evolve before their eyes. Their response was unlike anything in our military experience, the Admiral testified. Instead of requesting assistance from other galactic powers or attempting diplomatic resolution, they began to adapt. Their technology advanced at an impossible rate. Within months, they were matching our capabilities. Within a year, they were exceeding them. The most disturbing part of the testimony described what the Admiral called unprecedented tactical innovation. The humans had not simply improved their existing technology. They had developed entirely new approaches to warfare that violated established galactic conventions. They had weaponized concepts that other species had never considered militarizing. They do not fight like civilized beings, Admiral Zex had told the Council. They do not seek glorious battle or honorable victory. They seek total elimination of threats to their survival. When we destroyed one of their colonies, they did not mourn or retreat. They studied our attack methods and developed countermeasures that turned our own weapons against us. The transcript ended abruptly, but Keth found additional fragments in related files. References to the Terran War appeared in military historical documents from dozens of different species. Each reference described the same pattern. The humans had demonstrated capabilities that fundamentally challenged galactic assumptions about warfare, technology, and civilization itself. The war had lasted only 18 months, but its impact had been profound. The mighty Zephyrian Empire, one of the galaxy's three great powers, had been reduced to begging for mercy. Their vast fleets had been systematically destroyed or captured. Their core worlds had been blockaded until their population faced starvation, but the humans had not sought conquest or revenge. According to the fragmented records, they had offered terms that shocked the galactic community. They would withdraw to their original territory and refrain from further expansion. In exchange, they demanded complete isolation. No contact with galactic civilization. No interference in their internal affairs. No acknowledgement of their existence, the Galactic Council had agreed. Immediately, Keth found the final piece of the puzzle in a document that should not have existed. Hidden in the personal files of a long-dead Council archivist was a complete copy of the Isolation Treaty. The document was marked with security classifications that exceeded anything in the modern galactic legal system, but the archivist had apparently kept it as a historical curiosity. The treaty was comprehensive and absolute. Every known species in the galaxy had agreed to treat the human-controlled region as if it simply did not exist. Trade routes would be redirected around their territory. Maps would show the area as empty space. No contact would be attempted under any circumstances. The penalty for violation was immediate expulsion from all galactic institutions and total economic isolation, but the most revealing clause was the final paragraph. The Council acknowledges that this agreement represents not the defeat of the Terran species, but rather a recognition that their continued isolation serves the best interests of galactic stability. The demonstration of their capabilities during the recent conflict has proven that integration into galactic society would pose unacceptable risks to existing power structures and social norms. Keth read that paragraph 3 times before its full meaning sank in. The galaxy had not defeated the humans. The galaxy had been terrified by them. The Isolation Treaty was not a punishment imposed on humanity. It was protection sought by everyone else. For 3 centuries, the galaxy had maintained the fiction that humans did not exist because acknowledging their existence would force every species to confront an uncomfortable truth. Somewhere in the dark spaces between the stars lived a civilization that had proven itself capable of challenging the established order of galactic society, The humans had agreed to isolation not because they had been forced to, but because they had chosen to. They could have conquered the galaxy 300 years ago. Instead, they had withdrawn and allowed the existing civilizations to continue their lives in comfortable ignorance. Keth leaned back in his chair and stared at the ancient documents spread across his desk. He now understood why his sensor readings from the restricted zone had shown such massive infrastructure. The humans had not been idle during their centuries of isolation. They had been growing, building, developing technologies that the galaxy could not imagine. The question that haunted him was simple. What did humanity look like now, after 300 years of unrestrained development? And more importantly, what would happen if the galaxy's carefully maintained ignorance was finally shattered? Ambassador. Keth had always believed that knowledge was better than ignorance, that truth was preferable to comfortable lies. But as he contemplated the implications of what he had learned, he began to understand why the galaxy had chosen to forget that humans existed. Some truths were too dangerous to know. Captain Torres had been monitoring alien communications from her position aboard the deep space vessel Prometheus for 6 years. Her ship maintained a careful patrol along the inner boundary of human space, far enough from the official perimeter to avoid detection by galactic monitoring stations, but close enough to observe any unusual activity beyond their borders. The work was routine and often boring. Most alien communications were mundane commercial traffic, diplomatic exchanges, and civilian chatter. The galactic species had long since stopped talking about humans, except for occasional classified military briefings that confirmed the ongoing isolation protocols. Torres and her crew were essentially watching a galaxy that had forgotten they existed, but today was different. Torres had been tracking an Alterian diplomatic vessel that had drifted close to the perimeter 3 weeks earlier. Standard protocol required her to monitor any ships that approached human space. But this particular vessel had done something that set off every alarm in her intelligence analysis protocols. The ship had actively scanned human territory with long-range sensors, and its passenger had been conducting extensive research into restricted zone archives. What truly concerned Torres was not what Ambassador Keth had discovered, but how the galactic powers were responding to his investigation. Her communications intercepts showed increasing chatter among various intelligence agencies. Military commands were reviewing old contingency plans. Most disturbing of all, several species were quietly discussing something they called the human problem. Torres activated the ship's quantum communication array and established a secure link to Earth Command. Within minutes, she was speaking directly with Admiral Park, the highest-ranking officer in the Human Defense Force and one of the few people authorized to make decisions about contact with the outside galaxy. Admiral, we have a situation developing beyond the perimeter. One of their diplomats has discovered our existence and has been conducting research into the old isolation treaties. The aliens are getting nervous. Admiral Park's image flickered slightly on the communication screen, a side effect of the quantum encryption that protected their conversations from galactic surveillance. How much does he know? Everything, sir? Our intelligence analysis indicates he has accessed the original treaty documents and understands the historical context. He knows why we were isolated, and he knows we chose that isolation rather than having it imposed on us. That's problematic. What's the galactic response? Torres consulted her data files. Mixed, sir. Some factions want to maintain the status quo and suppress the information, but others are suggesting that 3 centuries of isolation might have made us weak or irrelevant. There's talk of exploring the possibility of reintegration or even territorial reclamation. Admiral Park was quiet for a long moment. Captain, in your assessment, how serious is this threat to our security? Unknown, sir, but I'm detecting military mobilization in several sectors adjacent to our territory. Nothing overt, but fleet movements that suggest contingency planning. They're preparing for something. Any indication of what that something might be? Torres had been dreading this question. Sir, some of the intercepted communications reference something called a final solution to the human question. The context suggests they're considering preemptive action against us. The Admiral's expression hardened. They think we've grown weak during our isolation. Yes, sir. They remember us as a primitive species that got lucky during a single conflict 3 centuries ago. They don't understand what we've become during our time alone. Admiral Park nodded slowly. Captain, maintain your surveillance operations, but prepare for the possibility that our isolation is about to end. I'm going to brief the Joint Chiefs and recommend we begin defensive preparations. What level of preparation, sir? Full spectrum. If the galaxy has decided to test us, we need to be ready to remind them why they chose isolation in the first place. After ending the communication, Torres called her senior staff to a briefing session. The Prometheus carried a crew of 43 specialists from various branches of human space services. They were among the best-trained personnel in the defense force, selected specifically for their ability to operate independently in the dangerous region between human space and the galaxy at large. People, we have a developing situation, Torres began. Our isolation may be ending sooner than anyone expected. I need all departments to begin quiet preparation for potential hostile contact. Her intelligence officer, Commander Liu, raised his hand. Captain, what's our assessment of current galactic military capabilities? Torres had been studying this question for years. Based on our observations, galactic military technology has remained essentially static for the past 3 centuries. They've focused on maintaining existing power balances rather than developing new capabilities. Their weapons, ships, and tactics are all incremental improvements on the same systems they used during the original conflict. And our capabilities? Asked her engineering officer. Classified, but significantly advanced beyond anything they can imagine. We've had 300 years to develop without the constraints of galactic treaties or diplomatic considerations. Our technology is no longer recognizable as an extension of what they remember. Her weapons officer, Lieutenant Singh, looked concerned. Captain, if they've been maintaining the isolation for 3 centuries, why would they break it now? Torres had been considering this question. Because they've convinced themselves we're no longer a threat. 300 years of silence have made them complacent. They think we've either stagnated in isolation or destroyed ourselves through internal conflict. The idea that we might have continued to develop and grow stronger during our isolation simply hasn't occurred to them. What are our orders if they attempt contact or aggression? Maintain the perimeter at all costs. But if they cross into human space with hostile intent, we are authorized to remind them why the isolation protocols exist. Over the following days, Torres watched as galactic military activity continued to increase around human space. Fleets that had been stationed in distant sectors were quietly repositioning closer to the perimeter. Intelligence communications suggested that several species were coordinating their movements, possibly preparing for a joint operation. Most intriguingly, Ambassador Keth was attempting to establish communication protocols with human territory. His diplomatic vessel had returned to the perimeter region and was broadcasting standard first contact messages on multiple frequencies. The ambassador appeared to believe that direct communication might resolve the developing crisis, Torres reported. These developments to Earth Command and received new orders that both impressed and concerned her. Human space was beginning to mobilize its own defensive capabilities for the first time in 3 centuries. Deep space monitoring stations were being activated. The reserve fleets were coming out of storage. Most significantly, the advanced defense systems that had been built during the long isolation were being brought online. The galaxy had spent 300 years pretending humans did not exist. But if they chose to acknowledge that existence through aggression, they would discover just how much humanity had accomplished during their time alone in the dark. Torres looked out at the stars beyond the perimeter and wondered if the galaxy was prepared for the revelation that their greatest fear had not been destroyed by isolation, but had instead been given time to grow into something far more formidable than they had ever imagined. The careful balance that had maintained peace for 3 centuries was about to be tested, and Torres suspected that the galaxy was about to receive a very unpleasant reminder of why they had chosen to forget humans existed in the first place. The meeting took place in the empty space between worlds. exactly at the boundary line that had separated human space from the galaxy for 3 centuries. Ambassador Keth arrived in a small diplomatic shuttle, having convinced his government that direct communication was the only way to prevent a crisis that could devastate both sides. Captain Torres represented humanity in the same patrol vessel that had been monitoring the situation from the beginning. For the first time since the isolation treaty was signed, a human and an alien would speak face to face. Keth's shuttle approached, slowly, broadcasting peaceful intentions on all standard diplomatic frequencies. Torres matched his approach speed and established a communication link between their vessels. Both ships maintained careful distance, close enough to talk but far enough apart to avoid any appearance of aggression. "Ambassador Keth," Torres said, her voice carrying across the void between their ships. "I am Captain Torres of the Human Defense Force. You requested this meeting." "Captain Torres," Keth replied, struggling to keep his voice steady, "thank you for agreeing to speak with me. I believe we are facing a situation that could end badly for everyone involved." Torres studied the alien diplomat through her ship's visual display. Keth appeared nervous but determined, exactly what she would expect from someone who had spent weeks uncovering secrets that had been hidden for centuries. "You've been researching our history," she said. "Yes, I know about the War 300 years ago. I know about the isolation treaty. I know that your people chose to withdraw rather than conquer the galaxy when you had the chance. And what conclusions have you drawn from that knowledge?" Keth hesitated before answering. "That the galaxy made a mistake. We let fear dictate our policies. We chose ignorance over understanding. And now that ignorance is creating a crisis that could destroy the peace we've maintained for 3 centuries. Torres was impressed by the ambassador's honesty. Most galactic diplomats she had studied preferred comfortable lies to difficult truths. "Tell me about this crisis." "There are factions within the galactic government who believe that 3 centuries of isolation have weakened humanity. They think your technology has stagnated or that internal conflicts have reduced your capabilities. Some are advocating for military action to reclaim the territory you occupy." "And what do you believe, Ambassador?" Keth looked directly into the communication display, meeting Torres's eyes across the gulf between their species. "I believe they are making the same mistake the Zephyrians made 300 years ago. They are underestimating you because they cannot imagine what you have become during your isolation." Torres nodded approvingly. "That's a more intelligent assessment than we expected from galactic leadership. But intelligence alone may not be enough to prevent the crisis you mentioned." "What do you propose? I want to understand," Keth said. "I want to know what humanity has become during your centuries alone. I want to know what the galaxy would be facing if they choose aggression over diplomacy." Torres considered her options carefully. Her orders gave her broad discretion in handling first contact situations, but they also emphasized the importance of maintaining human security. Revealing too much about human capabilities could create new problems, but revealing too little might fail to deter galactic aggression. "Ambassador, 300 years ago, your people saw us as a primitive species that happened to defeat one galactic power through luck and determination. They didn't understand that the war with the Zephyrians was not about our existing capabilities, but about our potential." "I'm not sure I understand." Torres activated her ship's external display and projected an image of human space as it existed today. The sensor data showed massive space habitats, industrial complexes that spanned entire star systems, and technological infrastructure that defied easy categorization. When your people reached the stars, you found a galaxy full of established civilizations. You learned to coexist with existing power structures and social norms. When we reached the stars, we found a galaxy that wanted to take everything from us." Keth stared at the display data in amazement. The scale of human development was beyond anything in the galactic database. "This is what you built during your isolation. This is what we built because of our isolation. Ambassador, when the Zephyrians attacked us, we didn't just defend ourselves, we evolved. We became something new. Something that could match their military power and exceed their technological capabilities. Torres paused, choosing her words carefully. The galaxy thought they could contain us by giving us territory and leaving us alone. What they actually did was give us time to develop without constraints. 300 years to explore technologies that violate galactic treaties. 300 years to experiment with concepts that other species consider too dangerous to pursue. 300 years to become something that doesn't fit into the neat categories your civilization uses to understand the universe. Are you threatening the galaxy? Keth asked. No, Ambassador. I'm explaining why the galaxy was right to fear us and why that fear should continue. But I'm also telling you that we've grown beyond simple aggression. We've built a civilization that doesn't need to conquer others to survive. We've become something that could be a partner instead of a threat if the galaxy could overcome its prejudices. Torres activated another display, this one showing the comparative military capabilities between human space and the major galactic powers. The data was carefully edited to avoid revealing specific technologies, but the implications were clear. 3. Centuries ago, we fought the Zephyrian Empire to a standstill using improvised weapons and desperate tactics. Today, we could defeat every military force in the galaxy simultaneously without significant effort. Not because we want to, but because we've had 300 years to prepare for the possibility that our isolation might end. Keth felt something cold settle in his stomach. What are you saying? I'm saying that the factions in your government, who think we've grown weak, are about to make a catastrophic mistake. We've kept our part of the isolation treaty faithfully for 3 centuries. We've remained in our designated territory and avoided contact with galactic civilization. But if the galaxy decides that our isolation is no longer acceptable, then we will defend ourselves. Torres's expression became deadly serious. Ambassador, your people remember us as a species that could match Zephyrian technology after months of warfare. They don't understand that we've been continuously developing for 3 centuries without the political and social constraints that limit galactic technological progress. What do you want from this meeting? Keth asked. We want what we've always wanted, to be left alone. We chose isolation because it served our interests and yours. We could have conquered the galaxy 300 years ago, but we recognized that conquest would have required us to become something we didn't want to be. Torres looked out at the stars beyond their ships. But if the galaxy forces us to defend ourselves, we will do so with capabilities they cannot imagine. The choice is yours, Ambassador. You can help us maintain the peace by convincing your government to honor the isolation treaty, or you can step aside while we demonstrate why every species in the galaxy agreed to pretend we don't exist. And if I can't convince them, then the galaxy will learn what 3 centuries of human development looks like when applied to military purposes. And I promise you, Ambassador, that lesson will be much more expensive than maintaining the status quo. Keth sat in silence for a long time, absorbing the implications of what Torres had told him. The humans had not spent 3 centuries in decline or stagnation. They had used their isolation to become something that transcended the normal categories of galactic civilization. They had evolved beyond the species that had fought the Zephyrians, becoming something far more formidable. I'll do what I can, he said finally, but I need something to take back to my government. Some proof that maintaining the isolation is in everyone's best interest. Torres smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. Tell them this, Ambassador. The humans they remember from 300 years ago no longer exist. We've become something new. Something that makes the species that defeated the Zephyrian Empire look primitive by comparison. The isolation treaty isn't keeping you out of our territory, it's keeping us in. As the 2 ships separated and returned to their respective territories, Keth realized that the galaxy stood at a crucial turning point. The careful fiction that had maintained peace for 3 centuries was crumbling, but the truth that would replace it was more terrifying than anyone had imagined. The galactic map still stopped at human space. But now Keth understood that the boundary wasn't just a line on a chart. It was a barrier holding back something that the galaxy was not prepared to face. And that barrier was about to be tested by people who had no idea what lay beyond it.